Welcome to Chapter 19. We're going to look at commands and numbers. Before we dive into the lesson, I thought you might enjoy just taking a look at the oral review, Name That Tune. There are a number of classic American folk tunes that have been translated into Hebrew here. And I thought the most amusing one was number 3, LeMacDonald Hazain Chaya Sadeh, E-I-E-I-O. Uvasade Hayata Lozon, E-I-E-I-O. Imba Ba Sham, Va Va Sham. Hine Ba Sham Ba, B'chol Makom Ba Ba. And just a little fun there. You might enjoy those tunes. Moving on to page 195, we're going to look at the vocabulary here. And the vocab gives you the various forms of each of the numbers, specifically the masculine absolute and the feminine absolute form, then the masculine construct form and the feminine construct form. So the first two columns are the absolute forms, the second two columns are the construct forms. As you can see from the color coding, there's some problem with the book's layout of these, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But in short, the book has mixed up the masculine and the feminine forms of the numbers. They've done this, it's not a mistake on their part, they're deliberately altering the description of Hebrew numbers grammar, and I'm going to stick with traditional understanding of the way in which numbers work. So, in fact, Shalosh, Arba, Hamesh, Shesh, Sheva, Shemone, Tesha, and Eser are going to be regarded by me, as by almost every other Hebrew grammar, as masculine forms, and Shalosha, Arba'ah, Hamisha, Shisha, Shiva, and so on as feminine forms. Now, that makes them easy to recognize because the Kametz He on the end is the traditional, is the standard feminine ending for nouns and adjectives. Students sometimes struggle with the term cardinal and ordinal numbers, and so maybe give you a little mnemonic device that will help you with those terms. Ordinal numbers are the numbers that indicate an order of sequence. Ordinal and order, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and so on. Cardinal numbers are the numbers you would find on a card game like Uno or Skip-Bo, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ordinal for order, cardinal, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so that's the vocabulary, and we'll talk about the grammar of the numbers here in a minute. Coming down to the bottom of page 195, the book introduces you to what it calls commands, and which almost every other grammar would refer to as the imperative. Imperatives in Hebrew are all addressing you. Hebrew does not have a first person or a third person imperative, only a second person. So we don't parse imperatives as second, we just parse them as masculine singular, feminine singular, masculine plural, and feminine plural. As the textbook notes here at the bottom, the feminine plural command form is very rarely used, so it doesn't show up in the exercises for this chapter. Precisely how rarely, I've noted here in the margin, 22 times, with 7 of those 22 being in the book of Ruth. So there's actually a disproportionately high number of feminine plural imperatives in the book of Ruth. So The imperative forms in Hebrew give a command, just like they would in any other language. And the forms themselves are fairly easy to learn. Take the imperfect forms of the verb, drop off that first letter and vowel, and you have the imperative form. So, tishmor, you will guard. If you want to say guard, you say shmor. Tishmeri, you feminine will guard. Shimri, guard. Tishmeru, shimru. Tishmorna, shemorna. So, another way to think of this that I heard recently is, what is it that you eat around a campfire with graham crackers, chocolate, and marshmallows? Well, they're s'mores. And that's actually the first masculine singular form, shmor. If that helps you, that's great. Otherwise, you can just remember that they're the same as the imperfect forms without the preformative. Moving on down to the bottom of 196, you get some examples comparing the imperfect and imperative forms. Tishma et kolenu, Shema et kolenu. You will hear our voice. Hear. You will hear our voices, or hear our voices, or you could translate that listen to our voices. Tiftechu et ha-she'arim. You, plural, will open the gates. Pitchu et ha-she'arim. You, plural, open the gates. Now, some verbs lose their first letter in the imperfect. And you've been identifying a variety of those that do that. Lakach and yashav are both words that have weak letters that drop. So with the imperfect form of lakach, the lamed is lost in the imperfect, and it stays lost, so to speak, in the imperative. Kach et halechem, take the bread. Teshavu ba'aretz and shavu ba'aretz. All right, so we've seen on page 196 the forms, and then noticed that whatever weaknesses show up in the imperfect will be carried into the imperative form at the bottom of 196. Moving on to page 197, the book addresses the topic of the negative command, and notes that in Hebrew the command or imperative form is not used to express negative commands or prohibitions. Rather, so what that means is you don't put lo in front of the imperative to say don't do something. There's a different way to do that in Hebrew. Rather, negative commands are expressed, as the text says, by using the imperfect tense with the negative word lo. So I'm going to underline that because that's important. Negative commands are expressed by using the imperfect tense with negative words. As you can see, I've written above and jussive in the margin because the Hebrew does use the imperfect as well as a jussive, which is a shortened form of the imperfect, to negate commands. Specifically, here are the two grammatical constructions in which the negation of an imperative or a negative command is made. First, the negative word or the adverbial particle lo is used with an imperfect tense verb form to express, the textbook says, permanent prohibition. Now, you can state it that way, or you can express it as to express emphatic general prohibition. This type of negative command is often translated thou shalt not, or you must not, you will not, you shall not. So lo ta'aseh milchama, you shall not make war. Lo plus the imperfect is the form that shows up in the Ten Commandments. So all of the thou shalts in the Ten Commandments are lo plus the imperfect. Number two, the second form of the negative command is the word al, aleph, patach, lamed, used with a textbook says imperfect. You should cross that out and write jussive under it. All forms that occur with al are jussive to express immediate, and again I've crossed out the word temporary because it does not necessarily express temporary prohibition, and written the word specific underneath it. So all plus the jussive expresses an immediate and specific prohibition. So al tiftach et hasha'ar, don't open the gate. Obviously it's talking about a specific action of opening the gate being prohibited, and is saying that in regard to the present time, immediate now. All right, so we've seen the forms of the imperative in Hebrew. We've seen then the way in which negative commands are given, not with the imperative, but rather with lo plus the imperfect and all plus the jussive. And at the bottom of page 197, we get the description of how numbers are used in Hebrew. Again, there's going to be some correction here to the textbook. Hebrew numbers usually appear in a sentence immediately before the nouns that they describe. Number one is the only exception, and you want to note that. Number one appears after the noun it describes. So if you say one man, you say ish echad. But if you want to say three messengers, you say shalosha malachim. Now, the textbook says numbers must agree in gender with the nouns they describe. Actually, most grammarians say that the numbers 1 and 2 agree in gender with the noun they describe, and the numbers 3 through 10 disagree in gender with the nouns they describe. Just to show you what that looks like, let me take you back to the vocabulary section. And here you see that the feminine forms, achat, shtaim, shalosha, and so on, arba'ah, those are the feminine forms. The others in green are the masculine forms. The feminine forms of the numbers 3 through 10 will be used to modify masculine nouns, and the masculine forms of the numbers 3 through 10 will be used to modify feminine nouns. Okay, so make sure you've gotten that clear. An example of this is found here on page 197, where they give you the phrase 4 men and 4 women. 4 men is arba'ah, the feminine form of the number 4, plus anashim, obviously a masculine plural. For women, arba, the masculine form of the number, plus nashim, again, a feminine plural. So, this is one of the key peculiarities of Hebrew grammatical structure. We see that the numbers 3 through 10 do not agree in gender with the nouns that they modify. The last item on page 197 is that numbers above 1 can be followed by singular or plural nouns, but they always have a plural meaning. So we're used to nouns agreeing in number with the adjective that modifies them, but with numbers you can say 3 man, shalosha ish, and it means 3 men. Or you could say shalosha anashim. Both of them are equivalent in meaning. All right, moving on to page 198. you get a discussion of the numbers 11 to 20 and how they are formed. The textbook notes that numbers 11 to 19 are made by adding the words asar or esrei, which mean 10, or you could think of it as the English equivalent of the word teen, to the numbers 1 to 9. So if we want to say 11, we say ahad asar, or in the feminine, achat esrei. 12, shneim asar, or shtem esrei. Shalosha asar, shalosh esrei, and so on. So first, the ones digit. Second, the word for 10, until we get to 20, in which case you take the word for 10 and make it plural, esrim. And esrim means 20. At the bottom of, or the middle section of page 198, we get the description of word pair or construct absolute forms of numbers, construct forms of numbers. And the vocabulary has already notified us that numbers have construct form. Might be nice to just write construct above that, as well as masculine and feminine. And these construct forms are generally translated the same way as the number itself. So, esara yamim, 10 days. Here's the construct form, eseret yamim, literally 10 of days. But it's translated as 10 days. Okay? As the textbook notes, the construct form of a number usually appears before a definite noun. So in terms of what you would expect to be normal, you would expect absolute forms of numbers to show up before either definite or indefinite nouns, and construct forms of numbers to show up before definite nouns. All right, at the bottom of 198, we get a description of age, how age is indicated in the Hebrew Bible. And the age of a person is indicated by the word ben, meaning son for male, and bat, meaning daughter for a female. So to say that you're 100 years old, in Hebrew you say you're the son of 100 years. For example, Avraham ben Mea Shana. Literally, Abraham is a son of 100 years, but he's 100 years old. Rachel bat Shiva Shanim. Rachel is a daughter of 7 years, or she's 7 years old. And that wraps up this lesson. If you have any questions about it, feel free to contact me. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.